It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them, so thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. Today, my guest is CEO Serhat Unsal. Serhat is the Chief Executive Officer of Don Foods, where he joined in 2011. As President of International from 11 to 16, he led Don's global growth in the company's key European markets, along with emerging markets in Asia, Middle East, and Latin America prior to assuming the corner office. Before that, he spent 18 years with Unilever, where he started his career as a project manager, and he earned a Master of Science in Mechanical Engineering from the University of Cincinnati and an MBA from the University of Toronto. Serhat Unsal, welcome into the corner office.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here, Brent.
Great to have you here. And, we always kind of like to start our pod with a little bit of background in terms of those early years. And I know you've got a very fascinating international career and international origins as well, as I know from our brief discussion before starting our podcast. So maybe you can just start and tell us a little bit about the early years, where you grew up and what your early family life was like.
I grew up in a very happy middle-class family in Istanbul, Turkey. And my dad was a humble lawyer. And my mom was an elementary school teacher. And I have one brother, 10 years older than me. And my dad was the ultimate introvert who would speak very little. And my mom is the ultimate extrovert
A
who
good
loves
match.
being around people. She would love connecting with them. And I remember when I was a child, we used to take this 2-hour ferry ride to our summer house close to Istanbul. And during that 2 hours ride, she would become friends with the entire population of passengers, exchanging phone numbers and stuff. So they were so different. But in my family, being creative, being artsy and fun were valued a lot, and music and singing was a common hobby for almost all family members. And there was everything at home to be a happy child, to be honest. So I consider myself very lucky from that perspective.
That's awesome. Parents were professionals then. Did they attain higher degrees in Turkey?
They did actually. They were not business oriented, lawyer and teacher, but they had high degrees.
And what about your brother? That's quite a big age gap. I also have a brother that's 10 years older than I. And, I know I looked up to him a lot and, he was a role model for me. Did you have that kind of a relationship?
Absolutely. I always tell him that I feel like I had two fathers, and
Yeah.
when looking for pocket money, it came very handy.
When you ran out of your reserve with dad, you could always go to big brother, right?
Absolutely. And he's just like me, is a mechanical engineer, and his master's is also in mechanical engineering. And he's always been a great inspiration for me as a brother.
Now, did your family, your nuclear family, all immigrate to Turkey, or did that happen with you later in life?
No, I mean, I was born and raised in Turkey, and I was there until 28, 29
Oh, got
years
it. So
old.
went through all your education there. Uh-huh.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm both Turkish and Canadian as citizenship. And throughout my life, I lived in 4 countries. I lived in Turkey, obviously. I lived in Canada. I lived in the US, and I lived in the Netherlands.
Wow.
So
Awesome.
the question of where you're from, I always say, how much time do you have?
Spreek je een klein beetje Nederlands?
Yeah, actually, absolutely. En een
Heel
beetje,
goed.
yeah.
Ja, ik heb in Amsterdam gewoond ook.
Oh, wow. Yeah, heel
But for
goed.
our non-Dutch readers and listeners, we won't pursue that further. But
Absolutely.
did you work there, or were you studying in Holland?
I did work there. Actually, I was working at Dawn at the time. So it's funny that Unilever is a Dutch company. I never worked in the Netherlands with Unilever, but after Unilever, I came to the Netherlands with Dawn, and I was the president of Dawn's international business for yeah, more than 100 countries managed out of Netherlands.
Well, I'd love to get some insight into your early years because growing up in Turkey is unique. We've had, interestingly enough, probably about 10% of participators in our pod have been international, executives who grew up in countries and immigrated, some when they were early on in their careers and others like you after their education. So tell us a little bit about, growing up. Well, who were some of the early influencers in your life beyond your parents? Did you have coaches or teachers that were significant growing up in Turkey?
Yeah, I mean, I had some teachers, high school teachers, who had great influence on me, and and when I think about my early years, I always go back to my years in the drama club,
Oh,
because
right. Pursuing your mother's extroversion,
yeah,
right?
exactly. I mean, my brain goes back and forth between that, the mom side and the dad side. Probably on the mom side, I took leadership roles in the drama club. I wrote plays. I played myself, mostly comedy, by the way. But but that in that drama club, I got a lot of influence from some of the instructors and some of my friends who were there as well, from my peers, and then I was building model planes and flying them. So my brother had a friend who taught me how to do that, and I loved it. And by the way, I have a great story about that. After building several successful model planes, and I thought I gained enough experience and insights into building models and designing my own models. So one summer, I built this cruise ship. You know, like totally my design, and I was into engineering in a way. I did that. I painted, beautiful looking, and I thought I got it all right and put it on the sea. And the first during the first cruise, the ship sank, which which reminds me of another famous
Yeah,
ship.
exactly. You didn't name it the Titanic, I hope.
Nope, nope, nope. Only after, only after.
Oh, great stuff. What about school? Were you a good student?
I was actually, I was a very good student, maybe to the extent of being borderline nerd.
Okay.
And from elementary school to master's, I graduated with honor degrees from my schools, and I enjoyed learning, and I especially liked the analytical classes like math and physics and chemistry. So I remember as a 10-year-old kid, for the spring break, I went once to this beautiful Mediterranean resort with my parents, and instead of enjoying the resort, I studied most of the time because I had that huge sense of responsibility and wanted to be successful. And it's funny that my parents tried to persuade me otherwise. So things were a little upside down in my family.
Turning it down a little bit. Yeah. My dad was an educator as well, first a teacher and a principal. And, education, I'm sure, because of your mom's background, I'm sure was a very important part of, the emphasis as you grew up.
Huge, huge.
Other than the drama involvement, any other outside activities, sports, music, anything else that you got involved with as a kid?
Yeah, I mean, like any young boy, after school, I was playing sports. I liked basketball, tennis, soccer, but I wasn't very talented in sports, if I'm very honest. So I was more focused on reading books, reading encyclopedia, which I still do, and solving college level math problems with my brother.
Wow.
So so I got a lot into the more cerebral part of my activities, but also a lot of sports, obviously. But I love music. I come from a very music oriented family.
What instruments did you play or did you sing?
Well, I used to sing together with my brother, who was a fantastic singer. But I played the recorder. That's actually one of my hurts in life, because it was all around me music. I didn't pay enough attention to specializing in learning a specific instrument like a piano or guitar. It was like no big deal, but I regret it today. And actually, it's one of my projects, if I can, given my busy schedule, to learn how to play the piano together with my daughter.
Growing up in America, kids typically do entrepreneurial things. They'll have the ubiquitous paper route. Perhaps your children, pursued some of those things or selling, mistletoe at Christmas time. Was that part of the culture? Were there things that were entrepreneurial during your elementary or high school days or not so much in Turkey?
It was. I mean, it's a very trading culture, but because my parents were not business oriented, I wasn't necessarily raised with a huge business awareness in the family. But there must be something somewhere in my genes that I was
Skipped a generation or two, maybe.
probably I was trading and selling comic books
Ah, cool. Was that in elementary school, high school?
in elementary school, in middle school, high school. So I was just buying some rare books and selling them at a higher price, etc. So it
Ah,
was
came through early.
and I did a lot of tutoring for
Hmm.
pocket money, and I made a lot of money in my small world. And later in not high school, but later in college years, I also worked in a pizza store as a delivery boy.
All right. Right. We share that commonality as well.
Oh, you do? All right,
That's great for the
great.
tips, right? Great
Oh
for the
yeah, I
tip.
mean, I always delivered my pizza on time in full, and but joking aside, the pizza job actually taught me a lot about leadership and the team dynamics.
And customer service.
Absolutely, and when it was raining, I would turn my cap upside down, fill it with water, and right before I ring the bell, I would put the hat on, so water is running down my hair, and here's your pizza, sir.
Oh, I love
So
it.
yeah,
I love it.
that's $20 minimum.
Fantastic. And in the earlier years with your comic books and the tutoring, did you save your money knowing that someday you might have a big purchase? Did you spend it on other activities as you went? How did you kind of manage your entrepreneurial winnings, so to speak, in those early days?
Actually, that's a great question, which reminds me that I've saved that money and I bought myself a stereo system,
Ah,
which connects to my love for
sure,
music,
music.
and it was a big thing at the time. And CDs were just coming out, and from the cassettes to CDs, and I really loved my music system that I bought with my pocket money.
And then built the collection behind that, I'm sure.
Absolutely, I still have them.
Fantastic. And then, again, not comparing cultures, but it's very common, of course, kids going to school, college, undergraduate, graduate degrees, having jobs that might help fund the education. I'm not sure exactly in Turkey whether that was something that was nationally funded or privately funded, but did you work during high school and college? Were there jobs that you had that helped support your education, or perhaps additional spending habits, so to speak?
Yeah, well, actually, it was all state paid at my time. So
So it's similar to Europe in that respect.
exactly, it's very European, the systems. I mean, today it's more private and state paid, kind of mixed. But I didn't have to. And culturally, I mean, making a little bit of pocket money was okay. But if I was like really looking for, some income to survive, that wouldn't look good on my parents. So that was the culture. When I told my parents that I'm in the U.S. in a pizza store delivering pizza, they said, "Why?"
Yeah, you should be focusing on studies, right?
Exactly, which actually, I mean, that experience taught a lot, and absolutely was very valuable.
So, undergraduate and graduate degrees, from what I gather, and did those both in Turkey? Was it a combination of domestic as well as some international learning? Tell me a little bit about those educational years, tertiary education.
I finished a few universities. I mean, my undergrad is in mechanical engineering in Turkey from the Bosphorus, yeah, Bosphorus University, which was one of the top institutions. And then I got my master's degree from the University of Cincinnati in artificial intelligence and robotics, which is crucial for selling cakes right now, which is what I do. But then I did get my MBA from the University of Toronto from Rotman School of Business. So those are the educational moments I had.
What years were you in Cincinnati? I wonder if we overlapped during my Procter and Gamble time.
It was between 1990 and 93.
Yeah, I think I just missed you. I left there in '89, so yeah, it's a great town to live in. It gets a hard knock because of its Midwest location, but I enjoyed my years in Cincinnati.
Okay, I remember when I first arrived the first year, Cincinnati has got the World Series in baseball,
That's right.
and never happened again, as far as
Yeah.
I know.
So mechanical engineering, dad was a lawyer, mom was a school teacher. What led you to that area of study?
Actually, my brother was a mechanical engineer, and he wanted to be a doctor, but during the SAT equivalent exam, he scored too high. So he went into, because of the system at the time, he went to a school that he didn't want and became a mechanical engineer. And he's been my inspiration all along. And I thought that that's the right thing to do. So I don't know if I would be a mechanical engineer again, although I enjoyed the analytical side of the mechanical engineering education.
Now, one of our sons is also an ME and has gone to work for Ford, and he's now with a startup in the electrical vehicle battery storage area. And it's well beyond my capabilities, but it's a fascinating area and an area in which you really use your brain. It's a combination of science and working across a number of different areas. Did you work in the field then as well in mechanical engineering at some point in time?
Um, Very little actually. I mean, I tried to get some jobs in robotics and mechanical engineering. And my first experience in Unilever, I spent about 18 years in Unilever, and the first job was kind of an engineering job. It was a project manager job where I was managing the execution of big investment projects in one of the plants in Unilever Turkey. But I wouldn't exactly call it engineering, which was very early in my career, like the first year or two. And then I was a sales and marketing person in general management most of my career.
And was there some gaps between the time that you received your undergraduate and then your graduate, or did you, kind of do those back to back?
They were back to back. And as soon as I finished my master's, I got hired by Unilever. So, two companies, Unilever and then Dawn in my career. So quite simple.
And did Unilever recruit at your campus, or what led you to joining them?
Well, in early 90s, after my master's degree in Cincinnati, I went back to Turkey, and in those years, Procter and Gamble and Unilever were the two companies that were very admirable. I mean, they were paying very high, they were teaching a lot of things, so people were aspiring to be in those companies. So I applied to Unilever. I think it was a newspaper ad. I thought I would never hear from them again because they didn't call me like for 2 months. And then one day I received a call, and it was the call, and then I stayed there for 18 years.
So, Sarat, you were telling me that your first job out of college was with Unilever. Was it in the mechanical engineering field?
Well, it was it was an engineering job. What I did was I was a project manager in one of the manufacturing plants of Unilever back in Turkey. And I was kind of managing the big investment projects at the time, but that lasted like for a year or two. And after that, I was primarily in sales, marketing, and general management.
Awesome. Did they give you some leadership responsibilities early on?
They did actually. I mean, that was one of the things that I really admire, even as of today, about Unilever, that they really trust you. They give you that responsibility, and I learned quite some early lessons early in my career about leadership.
Do you remember the first time you had people reporting to you? What was that job?
Well, I learned quickly in that job that people are different and different things motivate them. So each person in the team wants to be approached differently. Like some people, I realize they like a pat on the back. Some people love to debate endlessly and want to challenge you, and some want to be left alone. So everyone is different. So actually, I remember one of my early team members in that job was very difficult and always wanted to talk about how it will not work. And I used to sit down with him and listen for a while, and then after a while, he would get finally exhausted and talk about how it may work. And people are different, and it's the leader's job to communicate and connect with different styles at the end of the day.
Were you managing people that were significantly older than you? I know that Procter, typically does that if you come into those positions and you have folks that, have been there for a longer period of time, or were you managing peers of the same age level?
Yeah, absolutely. They were much older than myself. And I mean, that was good in many ways because I quickly learned that respect was at the center of leadership. So you have to respect the people around you, your team, your customers, your suppliers, and your competitors for that matter, and recognize them all for what they do. And at the end of the day, I learned everyone is equally good. I mean, they just excel in different things, and people have different capabilities. And as a leader, it's your job to match work at hand to the talent at hand.
And how many years were you at Unilever?
I was there for a total of 18 years.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Wow. So you left at a fairly senior level. What were some of the best or worst lessons that you learned from previous bosses there?
Oh, I think
You don't have to mention any names. That's okay.
no, no, absolutely. I mean, a lot of the things that I learned probably shaped how I think about leadership. And I think I learned being open and transparent and inclusive with my team. So this allows them to know what's going on at any given time, and then this enables them to contribute more to decision making. And I believe that a team that can think and act together is a stronger team than a command and control team. So I was very lucky to work with some leaders that were fantastic in what I would call circular leadership rather than hierarchical leadership. So I learned quite a bit. And I also had some managers that were micromanaging. And I don't believe in that at all myself. And I believe in delegated power rather than centralized power. So I believe that unleashes the energy of people into the organization. It engenders trust, and that creates that culture of shared accountability. So I mean, both good and bad. I had some fantastic examples that shaped my leadership style.
And some wonderful experiences too. I imagine that Unilever, as with Procter in my experience, moved you around quite a bit. Did you have assignments in Europe as well as the U.S. during your 18 tenure there?
Actually, I worked within Unilever. I worked in Turkey and I worked in Canada. So
In Canada. Got it.
yeah, I never had to move to any other country in Europe during my Unilever tenure. But as I said, I worked in Netherlands with Dawn after I left Unilever.
So what was that first job when you left Unilever to join Don?
I joined Dawn as the vice president of Europe, and at the time we were going through a major acquisition, and we were about to make the acquisition. So I joined Dawn, and a few months later we made the acquisition. So pretty much my first job was to integrate this new acquisition into the existing company, which happened to be three times larger than the existing company in Europe at the time. Yes.
So that must have been quite a challenge. What was some of, kind of the most challenging part of that integration? Sometimes cultures can be quite different between countries. What was the kind of single biggest challenge you had in that integration period?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the single biggest challenge was we acquired a company that was larger than ours in Europe, at least. So they thought their their frame of mind, their thinking, their culture was the primary culture, and we thought, well, we're acquiring you, so our culture is the main culture. So,
Right, right.
so it was, the terminology was different. The recognition programs were different. The cultural cues were different. So everything was different between two companies. Not that one was good or the other was bad, but it was just different. And people had different frames of mind. They looked at the same problem through different lenses. So the biggest challenge was to basically align the team to look at the same issue with the same eyes so that we can come up with creative solutions.
Yeah, yeah. Respect, but also be able to kind of guide. Did you lose a lot of people during that transition? Were there people that decided that they did not want to be a part of the new company?
Not a lot. I mean, there were a few. Obviously, there's always that kind of attrition in this kind of process, but nothing big. I mean, a lot of the great people that came to our company with that acquisition are still with our company, and they're doing a fantastic job. And now we all speak the same language, and we go back to those days sometimes and laugh. And but at the end of the day, I think we achieved a pretty unique integration through the power of two companies.
And tell me a little bit about, your career at Dawn. So how long have you been in the corner office?
Well, I've been in this job the last 3 years.
3 years,
So
right.
yes.
And did you go directly from the head of Europe to that position, or were there some opportunities in between?
What I have done is from the VP of Europe job, I went into the leader of Europe, Africa, Middle East, and Asia Pacific job, and then Latin America was added to that, and I became the head of international. I was the president of international, and at the same time, I was acting as the chief strategy officer of the company, so building the corporate strategy for the next 5 years.
Got it. So reporting to the CEO in the last position prior to taking it over.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
so Carrie Barber, who's my partner now, I used to report to Carrie before I joined this job, and at the end of the day, the Carrie and the board said, you cooked it, come and eat it now.
A good analogy for your business. And you'd mentioned 18 years at Lever, great company. How many years have you now been at Dawn?
It's been 8 years, 5 years international, and last 3 years in this job.
How would you say your leadership's really evolved over time, particularly during these years of senior leadership management at Dawn?
Yeah, I mean, I think well, I'm getting older as a person, so I'm getting more mature.
Amazing how that happens.
Absolutely, I've been fighting that, but time is moving on. Um, I think the basics that I built are still applicable in the sense that that openness, that transparency that I believe in is I'm trying to apply this everywhere that I have an opportunity to lead. And again, the delegated power, the giving the power to the team members and allowing them to decide and do things without checking with the boss is an important thing, is an important feature that I'm trying to integrate into the new thinking. And also, I mean, I learned early on that you have to ask yourself the question of why should anyone be led by you, right? Why should anyone care or follow? And what value do you provide as a leader? And I learned that as a leader, you must create a shared vision, a purpose, a community, which everyone willingly wants to be part of and find their personal stories in that shared purpose. And people want to be led by you if you help them achieve their personal aspirations. So that's what I'm trying to do. I have examples of having done that in my previous jobs. In this job, we're building towards that. I still, have some more mileage to go. Uh, but like in my previous job in Unilever Turkey, I remember we were selling culinary ingredients to professional chefs, ingredients like bouillon, spices, seasonings, and we created a shared mission that was about introducing international tastes to Turkish cuisine and introducing Turkish tastes to international cuisine, like creating almost like a culinary ambassadorship and sell innovative products, and while doing that become the fastest growing division in Europe. And this mission, this journey motivated the team beyond their daily job or their salary or the let's say the mechanics of the job. And guess what? We became the fastest growing business 2 years in a row. So that is important to align in a global job. It's obviously more complicated than a single country. That's why it's taking more time. But that is the direction that we're trying to take.
We touched a little bit on company culture when you talked about the integration in Europe. How important is it for you as CEO to really be working on a continued development of the company culture? Or do you feel that Dawn Foods is at a stage where, it's pretty much set and you're kind of following the leadership of the past as it relates to that specific mission or vision of the company?
The culture is absolutely one of the most critical ingredients of being successful. And we're lucky to work in a company that has a very good, very successful culture. And the best way to describe our culture is probably to say it's a please and thank you company. So the basic kindness and positive attitude is at the center of the culture. So we want to protect that and we want to nurture that. That's very important. But at the same time, we need to recognize and realize the fact that our competitive battleground is changing. So in the past, it was more about personal relationships. I mean, today it's more about systems, ITs, and more complicated marketing and sales solutions and manufacturing technologies. But in the near future, it's going to become more digital AI. We're actually almost there. So when that happens, the whole company needs to think, behave, and act in a very different way. So we shouldn't lose who we are, what we do. That's very important, and we're very proud and lucky to have that. But we also need to add on top different habits, like different risk taking, like different ways of interacting with each other, maybe being okay with making mistakes and moving on to the next opportunity. So there's a different way of thinking that we need to adapt ourselves to.
Well, it sounds kind of more like evolution than revolution.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is good to say.
What do you look for when you're making bets on the people you invest in to hire?
That's a great question because at the end of the day, I believe going forward in the next 50 years, I may or may not be here, but in the next 50 years, I'm eating healthy and doing a lot of exercises,
Good,
but still,
exercising regularly.
yes, still don't make a bet on it. But in the next, let's say, 50 years, I believe we're a bakery company, we're a foods company. I believe we can find sugar, we can find flour, we can find shortening to make our products, we can find everything. But I'm really worried about finding the right people at the rate of growth. So this is why it's very important we have the right people. And some of the things that I look for as a high EQ, emotional intelligence, because at the end of the day, people deal with people at work, and understanding the emotional environment in which you operate and understanding your own feelings objectively and understanding the feelings of others accurately and showing empathy. These are critical to achieve success. So that's what one of the things. The other thing I'm looking